And you are live.
Okay, this is House Education Thursday, February 13. Testimony this afternoon from the Vermont School Boards Association, which follows nicely on the discussion we just had when we talked about scale and governance. And they're going to give us their take on it. Without further ado, turn it right over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair Conley. I'm Sue Siglowski, the Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association, and we really appreciate the opportunity to discuss scale and governance with you today. I am joined today by Dr. Phil Gore, who is currently the Chief Learning Officer of the Idaho School Boards Association. And prior to moving to Idaho, Dr. Gore served as the Director of Board Services for the Vermont School Boards Association. He has also served as a Division Director for the Texas Association of School Boards, and he's worked for the National School Boards Association and the Washington State School Directors Association. Dr. Gore is the author of Improving School Board Effectiveness, a Balanced Governance Approach. His work in Vermont, combined with his work in other states and nationally, provides him with important perspectives to share with the committee on scale and governance. So I'm going to start first with a general overview of district sizes and school board sizes in the United States, and I will get to our response to the VSA policy brief after that. So under district size and organization by state, there are more than 13,000 geographically defined school districts in the United States. Most current school districts are for K through 12 education, but some are elementary and secondary only. This number does not include the charter schools in the United States or private and religious schools. A 2022 Ballotpedia analysis of school districts in the United States found that every state has at least one school district, with most states having more than 100. States with the fewest number of districts, other than Hawaii, which has one, are Delaware with 19, Nevada with 20, and Maryland with 24. States with the highest number of districts, and this is all in my written testimony, are Texas with 1,022, California with 977, and Illinois with 853. It is important to note that these numbers may have changed slightly in the last 3 years. The landscape of school districts is constantly in flux as new districts are created and existing districts are merged or eliminated over time. I'm going to turn now to school board size.
Actually, before you do that, so if I could just
Sure.
ask, is there a standard definition of school district? We have so many terms in Vermont. We say supervisory union.
Right.
Is it generally something that has a board and has a superintendent, or just has a board and maybe a principal?
That is a fantastic question. I think that it varies by state and it's actually quite complicated.
If you look at Vermont, and we generally, I think, throw around district, but we really mean superintendent, otherwise it was a supervisory union.
Right.
Because we've got school districts that don't even have schools.
Moving on to school board size. In terms of school board size, the range of 5 to 13 members per board is fairly typical across the United States. Surveys conducted in 2018 by the National School Boards Association showed that in 2010, boards with 5 seats were most common. 8 years later, in 2018, the typical school board contained 7 seats. It is important to note that while this 5 to 13 range is fairly typical across the US, there is no universally accepted ideal size for a school board. The effectiveness of a board depends on various factors beyond just the number of members. Factors such as board member backgrounds, adherence to best practices, small group dynamics, and ability to collaborate with the superintendent all play crucial roles in a board's impact on district performance. And this brings us to district performance, specifically student achievement, and whether and how a board has an impact on it. And to jump ahead to the conclusion, the answer is yes. Research concludes that the way school boards govern does indeed affect district level performance. How do we know this? The Iowa Lighthouse Study is one of the richest data sets available, conducted by the Iowa Association of School Boards. The association conducted ongoing research on effective school boards and their roles in advancing student achievement. The studies identified characteristics of school boards of districts with higher levels of student achievement and how they may affect their performance. Their conclusion: school board actions are a key part of a culture of improvement, and school boards can create conditions that promote student learning. The Center of Public Education, which is the research arm of the National School Boards Association, conducted a meta-analysis of 10 studies and reports on school board leadership, including several based on the Iowa Lighthouse study. The result is a report entitled 8 Characteristics of Effective School Boards. One of the most reputable research-informed lists of attributes of effective school boards, the 8 characteristics is a structure commonly referenced on the national level and when researchers are studying school boards. One of these characteristics of an effective school board is a collaborative relationship with staff and the community, and a strong communication structure to inform and engage both internal and external stakeholders in setting and achieving district goals. The Lighthouse study is particularly relevant in conveying this. The research found that in high achieving districts, board members maintained strong and open lines of communication with the superintendent, staff, and one another. They gathered information from multiple sources, including the superintendent, curriculum directors, principals, teachers, and external experts. While the superintendent played a central role in sharing information, they were not the sole source. Furthermore, findings and research were consistently shared among all board members, ensuring that decision-making was well informed. In contrast, board members in low achieving districts expressed concerns about uneven access to information. Some board members reported feeling excluded from key discussions, leading to a fragmented understanding of district priorities. High achieving districts also demonstrated a strong commitment to community engagement. Their board members could provide specific examples of outreach efforts and actively promoted involvement. Staff in these districts described the boards as supportive and respectful, noting that board members listened to their concerns and valued their input. One key strategy was to hold post-board meetings to brief teachers and administrators on policy decisions. By comparison, school boards in lower performing districts frequently cited challenges in communication and outreach. They often attributed low parent involvement to a lack of interest, yet they could identify only limited efforts to foster engagement. Many board members expressed frustration with the community's lack of participation, but believed there was little they could do to change it. Within the district, staff members from these lower performing schools often reported little to no interaction with their board members. I'm going to pause now and ask Dr. Gore to provide any comments that he has on the Lighthouse study, and specifically on the ability of 25 school board members serving the entire state of Vermont to achieve the characteristic that I spoke about earlier: collaborative relationship with staff and the community, and a strong communication structure to inform and engage both internal and external stakeholders in setting and achieving district goals. I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Gore.
Thank you, Sue. It is an honor to join you and the Vermont House Education Committee today. I had the privilege of participating in the Iowa Lighthouse research study. It was actually a study that spanned about 16 years and involved 13 different states. The original research was conducted in the state of Georgia, that at the time had a very robust set of data in the late 1990s that could be mined for the study. All to say that it was not unique to any one state or even any one region, but the findings from the study were really foundational for further study and research that's continued in the last couple of decades. Mary Delagardelle was the principal investigator in the study. She was coincidentally a school building principal in one district and a school board member in another at the same time. Mary was adamantly committed to the importance of community engagement, but she never could prove it statistically. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2016, and hasn't been able to see the further studies that have continued. But since then, other researchers, including Ivan Lawrenson and Bill McCaw from the state of Montana, have been able to show a statistical relationship between school boards engaging their communities in the board's work. So setting a vision, defining values, setting goals, and the likelihood that student achievement is improving overall, while at the same time achievement gaps are closing. Importantly, this is not the type of community engagement of parents, caregivers, families participating in schools. This is, again, community engagement, students, staff, and families engaging with the board in the strategic governance and oversight of the school system. Again, the board establishing values, vision, and goals collaboratively with the greater community. When the community participates in these governance type activities together with the board, that's where we see student achievement and gaps in achievement more likely to be improving. Vermont's long tradition of local governance of its public schools is highly more likely to support improved student outcomes than a more remote, regionally, or centralized governance of Vermont public schools. The closer governance is to the schools and the students, the more likely that governance is to represent the vision and values of the local communities and what those vision and values are for the schools. Arguably, there's a room for balance between community representation and efficiencies of scale. It's hard to know what would be the ideal number of school districts in any given state. Consideration needs to be given to both economies of scale, local and regional differences of both expectations and resources, and sharing of best practices across the state. While there is always room for improvement, state lawmakers and public education providers want to carefully explore and balance any mandated changes in governance structures. While it may be difficult to stipulate what the ideal number of school districts would be for Vermont, that number is much larger than 5. Back to you, Sue.
Thank you. I'm going to, unless there are questions here, I'm going to move on to speaking about school advisory committees.
I do have a question or two. First of all, I do always learn about causation and correlation, but I won't get into that. I think there's probably a correlation between people who are naturally more involved and having higher student achievement, as opposed to it being a causation of higher. Anyway,
yeah.
What I really like to know is there any, I think a challenge with school boards in Vermont is there volunteer, busy people who generally don't have the capacity to engage the community. And is there any data that shows that a semi-professional board or a raise in stipend translates into better community engagement?
Can I answer that, Sue?
Yes, please do.
Unfortunately, there is not. There are a handful of states that pay a substantial amount. I would call it a salary, probably more than typical legislators are paid. In the state of Florida, in the state of Nevada, in the state of Louisiana, there are a handful of states that pay school board members to serve on the school board. And very importantly, their outcomes are no better as a result. Now, do they have more time? Yes, but how are they spending their time? And you could do a fun Google search of some of those states to see how school board members are spending their time. A full-time school board member tends to spend their time on administrative and operational details of the district instead of the bigger governance picture. They're removed from that lay citizen role, if you will.
Thank you. It's a job. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Turning our attention to the creation of local school advisory committees or councils for every school. That's part of the governor's proposal to maintain a degree of local control in the proposed 5 districts. The concept of school advisory committees or councils is not new. Dr. Gore will speak to their some of their history and effectiveness in a few minutes. First, I would like to take an example from the School District of Philadelphia. In June of 2016, the School District of Philadelphia adopted a policy to create school advisory councils, which are peer-elected collaborative teams composed of family members, which is the largest group, the school principal, teachers, or other school-based staff, students from schools with grades 7 through 12, and community members. The policy was designed with the intent of significantly increasing the involvement of families and the community in the educational process and making the school advisory council a catalyst for change in the district's schools. However, over the past several years, the SACs in Philadelphia have struggled with their mission to be effective agents in support of student achievement. These challenges stem from a lack of cohesive policies, procedures, and practices related to their operations, and the difficulty of recruiting family members to join the SAC, resulting in unfilled seats. It is worth noting that this new structure requires additional resources. For instance, at the central office, Philadelphia has a school district office of family and community engagement to support the work of the SACs. It also requires additional resources at the building level and demands significant time from the principal, who is required to be a member of the SAC. And as a school leader, they are responsible for ensuring the committee's creation and fulfilling a list of duties related to the functioning of the SAC throughout the year. Other questions and issues related to the SAC that would need to be addressed are bylaws to define the size of the SAC, the role of officers, how officers are chosen, who can be a part of the SAC, how are members chosen, if it's by an application process, the timing and criteria for those choices, if by election, who runs the election and what are the procedures, are elections school-wide or community-wide, or are members selected by their constituency group, for instance, parents, staff, and students. What is the length of their term? What number constitutes a quorum? Who determines the agenda for each meeting? A conflict of interest procedure, public comment parameters, operation policies and procedures, clarity of roles and responsibilities of the SAC members, and are the SAC meetings subject to open meeting law? And if so, which requirements of the open meeting law would apply? An overarching question to all of this is, how would the chain of authority and accountability that is so clear right now in our education governance system in Vermont be affected by this new structure? In today's system, authority flows from the community, specifically the residents or voters, to the board to ensure that the district is well run. The board delegates authority to the superintendent, who is the CEO of the district, who in turn delegates it to their administrative team, and it continues on from their staff. Accountability flows in the direction from staff back up through the admin team, superintendent, board, and community. Where would the SAC fit in this chain of authority and accountability? Before I move on to the VSBA's response to the Vermont Superintendents Association's policy brief, I'm going to pause to see if Dr. Gore has any comments related to SACs, and he does not have any written comments on this topic.
Thank you, Sue. I've had some experiences firsthand with site-based councils. This is one of those things that sort of has a 25-year cycle that just seems to come back around. But these were highly promoted in the 1980s and prolifically adopted across the U.S. in the 1990s. I served on a school board in a rural school district outside of Seattle in the early 2000s, and we had site-based councils. The challenge becomes over time, and Sue alluded to this, it's an additional duty as assigned to the local principal to make sure these happen. In reality, they don't accomplish anything more or better than a highly effective local PTO or PTA. They're filling the same type of role. It's a sounding board. What do you think about this? What do you think we should do on the new playground? What are your thoughts on the time of day here that we are ending time and how we line up kids for getting on the buses? That tends to be the level of conversations that happen in site-based councils. While well attended and acknowledging They can be of help and assistance. The problem is over time, there's a devolution. And I have seen this all across the country where the law says you have to have a site-based council, or even a school district policy says you have to have a site-based council, and it has to include this person, this group of people, this group of people. Over time, a principal that doesn't have a lot of extra time for the extra duties as assigned simply puts staff people in just about every single role on the committee. So you end up with a staff who happens to be a parent of a child in the school, or happens to serve in some other capacity in the community. And it just becomes stacked with nearly all and sometimes only staff people, which really just destroys the whole idea of public and community participation in anything that we would think of as governance, of curriculum matters, of discipline matters. And then these people are not elected. They're not authorized typically by law to be privy to personnel needs, staff discipline needs, student discipline needs, right? So they're really removed from having any true accountability or authority, and they're just another meeting that the principal has to have once a month.
I have a question. I'm thinking back to when we went through Act 46, unification in my district. And I do know the superintendent made an attempt at doing school advisory councils. I would say he formed them. Therefore, I think a lot of the questions that you brought up, Sue, about chain of command and open meeting law and all that, it was because it was more advisory and sort of getting together. But I do remember it being used. Well, first of all, it fell apart just as you described. But I remember being used to fulfill federal or state requirement for school improvement plans or something. Could you talk a bit about that? My memory's a little foggy on that.
That is a requirement under ESSA, the school improvement plan, and it is a requirement to involve the community.
So maybe it was an attempt to have a tool
Yes.
to fill the ESSA requirement. So how do districts, such as some of the ones that you're familiar with, deal with that ESSA requirement? Period.
So
I'd
again,
be happy to answer. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
well, again, that idea that if you need a parent on the committee or a guardian, you just simply pick a staff member that happens to check that box as well. And I mean, that's the way I've seen this played out.
And I can remember when I was a school board member that the principal pulled together a group of people to do that work. And as a school board member, I was the one from the board that participated.
So if school advisory councils generally don't work, I guess I would say, well, what then? What's the alternative to, you know, if we have larger districts, and I'm not saying 5, but maybe we have 14. How do people feel, or what role? What's the alternative to this? Is it just a robust PTO PTA?
I'd love to have Phil speak to this because one of he works with individual school boards. And I know that one of his strengths is working with boards to increase their community engagement.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. So again, site-based councils are not a bad idea. It's just, if they're mandated at the state level, how do you frame it in a way that you end up with good results? I know that's your conundrum every time you enact a new law. What are the unintended consequences of this? And then what's the reality of how it's developed in the field? I guess for one, I would encourage a conversation that the committee has maybe with representative group of principals from the state, as well as perhaps representative group of teachers for how they see that working. I do think it can work hand in glove with the school board if it's district policy and then site-based councils that actually report back to the board somehow back up to another level of accountability, so that it's not just, again, a conversation about planning the Valentine's Day event, but it's more of a conversation of how are we doing with improving student outcomes and ensuring student well-being at the local school?
Thank you.
Is it okay if I move on to
Yes,
instructional
I'll
scale?
check with the committee. Any other questions? I'm drinking coffee, committee, so I tend to ask a lot more questions.
That's okay. You got mine. You asked mine. It's all good. It's all good.
So the VSBA board met last night, and most of the meeting was dedicated to the governor's education transformation proposal. And as part of that deliberation, the board reviewed the VSA's policy brief on instructional scale. I have to say they had a very healthy and robust and respectful debate on this, on the recommendations in the policy brief. And at the end, the board was generally supportive of the recommendations in that brief as the framework for a bill addressing scale at the district, school, and class size level. In relation to scale at the district level, the board discussion indicated that the ideal number of school districts in Vermont lies somewhere between the current number of 119 and the governor's proposal of 5. Consistent with the VSBA legislative platform, which I know I've provided to all of you, they would like to see data and modeling for the VSA recommendations. They appreciate that those recommendations work within a structure that already exists and preserve some level of local control without uprooting the entire system. To conclude our comments on the VSA policy brief, the VSBA could support the policy levers addressed in that brief as the basis for a bill, with the understanding that we believe there is more work that needs to be done to flesh out the exceptions for infrastructure constraints and geographical necessity. And in conclusion, just want to reiterate the importance of public education in Vermont, it being a core of our strong communities, critically important for a healthy democracy. And given our current national climate, it is more important than ever to support our public schools by funding them in a sustainable way. This will involve hard choices to achieve efficiency and scale, and VSBA is ready to contribute constructively to making those choices in the Vermont context. Thank you.
And thank you very much for this, as well as the time that the board spent reacting to not only the governor's proposal, but to the policy brief that we got from the VSA. That's really helpful to us. Questions before I once again dominate?
Go right here. Go for it.
I'm not going to sit there and wait. I guess why don't we jump to a question we all have, and that is your map. We're big on looking at maps right now. Would you talk a little bit about the origin of your map, what it represents?
Which one is yours? Multicolored, green or yellow?
The one that's right there on the front.
Okay. See it?
Oh,
And
yep.
now we fully understand that both yours and the Superintendent's Association maps are created as nothing more than a tool to hold meetings.
Yes, correct.
But I think we would be interested in what is it based on?
It's based on our bylaws, and our regions changed, let's say maybe 6 years ago. Not significantly, but there were a few boundary changes. We have 11 regions, and we have 2 representatives from each of those regions that sit on our board of directors. So that is really the purpose of those regions, is to make sure that we have a board of directors that represents all the areas of the state of Vermont. The regions are the Addison region, the Bennington region, Central Vermont, Eastern Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle, Kingdom North, Kingdom South, Rutland, Western Chittenden, Windham, and Windsor. So several of them do correspond with county lines, but not all of them.
Do they have a generally equal number of population of students or people or board members or?
I don't know about people, but students, based on the FY24 ADM, the range in our regions is from roughly 4,000 to 10,000. There's the two Eastern and Western Chittenden regions are in the 10,000 range, and I think Addison is the smallest at like 3,900 and something.
Hmm.
Uh, you both spoke about the importance of a well-trained school board. Could you talk about the challenges that you have today when you have 119 school boards versus the ability to have well-trained, effective school boards if there are far fewer? I know that question sounds obvious, but
Yeah, well, there are a lot of challenges associated with school board training because school boards are volunteers, first of all, and they are also elected. So the membership of our association is constantly changing as elections occur, and also as school board members, they sometimes, for whatever reason, have to resign, during the year, and they are replaced by an appointment. So the composition of school board members is constantly changing. We do work to provide a webinar every month. We also provide new school board member training. We have a conference every year. There are a lot of ways that we work to provide training to school board members, but
it's all voluntary.
it's not required, right? It's not required, other than school board chairs are required to do 8 hours of training annually with their superintendent.
That's required in statute.
Yes.
All right, well, that's great to know. You want to talk about sort of the challenges of having 119 districts, school boards and making that happen?
And well, it's not enforced and no one keeps track of whether they do it or not. Yeah.
That's a lot of folks to keep track of. Yeah.
If we were to move to far fewer school boards or districts, therefore far fewer school boards and probably way fewer school board members, give some thought to, unless you'd like to comment right now, as to whether perhaps that training should be required in statute, since the oversight responsibilities of these boards would be significant.
Yes, I'd be happy to come back about that.
I don't know if your colleague can talk about across the country, school board training, whether it's required in statute or how that might work.
A majority of states do require some level of school board training to serve on the school board. I'm not aware of any state that has any real teeth in the statute. You push up against the fact these are unpaid volunteers, so consideration might be given to compensating them for their time and paying for the training if Vermont were to require it. When I looked at this, and I did a survey of the 50 states about 15 years ago, at that time, 40% of the states in the country had at least some minimum requirement for training. Again, today, that number is somewhere over 30 states that have a requirement. The dilemma gets, as we're talking about here, that how do you hold that locally elected person accountable for receiving the training? And I can assure you, because I've heard this many, many times by state association school board members, their response will be, hell no, we'll get our training when the legislators get theirs. And it's a natural.
Thank you for the warning.
Just know that one's coming. But we just surveyed, coincidentally, for whatever it's worth, we just surveyed school board members in Idaho, and we're surprised that 76% of them said they believe there should be some required training to serve on a school board. There are a lot of things that you need to know, and beyond the basics of complying by the law and fiduciary responsibilities, how do we work together as a team? How do we hold the superintendent and system accountable for results? The one thing I would add before I shut up on this topic is that if you require training, make sure it's actually training that makes a difference. I lived and worked in the state that has the most amount of training required in the state of Texas, and it's upwards of 70 or 25 to 26 hours in the first year, and about 9 to 16. It's kind of, there's some biennial requirements, 9 to 16 for continuing board members. Maybe half of that's helpful. So it's not just about the quantity, but it's about the content. What are the standards that you're trying to promote for school boards across Vermont?
Sue, fair to say that the SBA has a lot of training resources already at its fingertips?
Yes, absolutely.
High quality,
Yes,
I would vouch for. I would also vouch for the fact that it's required for chairs and superintendents to do training together. But I know in my years as a chair, the police never showed up at my house for skipping a Okay, please.
I'd be happy to speak to it because even though I am not a chair anymore and actually haven't been a chair since that requirement came into place, I am a school board member and I'm very aware of the, I can only speak for my own SU, but the responsibility that our superintendents and maybe slightly less so, but the chairs also take that into consideration. I mean, they feel really responsible to do it. And I have heard them say many times, oh, we can do this because it counts toward our 8 hours. It is not off the radar of all of our school boards. And I think it's really important for us to know that. So while we don't have a mechanism to enforce, the reminder is there. And I thank the VSBA for staying on top of that and the VSA, because it is a joint job that they
Yeah.
both do. I also want to say that there's a need for board roles and responsibilities training. And I can only speak for my district, but we do it annually and try to do it after elections so that new members participate in it. And we often actually pay an attorney to come in and help us with parts of that, outside of the SBA. And last thing I'll just mention, I haven't been to one of the conferences because I'm usually too busy lately, but for years I have attended training at the conferences and, they're really helpful to board members. So the ability to get training is there if we make it a priority as the role of a school board and a district, because it really does require that connection between the superintendent and the school board. It's critical to have that connection there, which is why I'm glad we passed the law saying it had to be joint training. Thank you.
I might lobby for Fairleigh not being the location every year.
And
next year
it
it's in
isn't.
Burlington.
And it isn't every year anymore.
Or I should say this year.
Which is very hard to-
This has been very helpful. Did you say, or at your discussion with the VSBA board about the VSA policy brief, could you discuss perhaps some of the concerns that came to the surface?
I think a lot of the concerns had to do with rural areas that would have challenges meeting the numbers that are in that brief. And that's why in my testimony, it says that we think that's an area that needs to be fleshed out more, the geographical issues, as well as, facilities challenges.
Yeah.
Those are the two big things.
Yeah, okay, that's very good to know. Right. Anything else? Thanks, and if you could come up with a perfect number for school board members, that would really be helpful to us. Just let us know what it is when you have it.
Okay, we'll work on
Turn
it.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, we are free till floor at 3. So